So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
And overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it's the protection of a fundamental human right.
Hello, and welcome to the Justice and Coffee podcast, the podcast where we talk justice over coffee with a special guest. And on this episode, that guest is the indefatigable Racheal Mutesi, founder of Ufahari Girls in Kaleri, Uganda. Now, we're putting out this podcast to coincide with the United Nations 16 Days of Activism to end gender-based violence. Trigger warning, this podcast does include the discussion of sensitive subjects such as sexual violence and the abuse of children and young people, so please be aware of that going into this conversation. We're also going to forgo any advertising on this podcast so we can keep our focus on the brilliant work of Racheal and her colleagues as they look to bring protection, hope and freedom to the girls in their stewardship. So let's dive straight in. So Racheal, welcome to the Justice and Coffee podcast. I'm so glad we were able to get this set up. Thank you for finding some strong Wi-Fi. You got headphones in, we're ready to go. And like any guest that comes on the podcast, I always open by firstly welcoming you, but also to asking you about coffee, because that is a big feature of my life and of our business. It's justice and coffee. So where does the coffee part feature for you?
Thank you so much. And it's such a great delight to be with you this morning struck afternoon in Kampala. Thank you for the great work that you are doing. And thank you for your love for coffee, because Uganda is a very big producer of coffee. Sadly, I don't like coffee. I don't know.
That's it. Podcast terminated.
Yeah, but I only take it for patriotic reasons, because we have good coffee. So I take coffee to affirm to the world that we have good coffee.
You are a Ugandan ambassador for coffee who doesn't actually drink or enjoy the product. That's a very honourable thing to do for your country. Okay, well that's a short start since you're not a big fan. What is your drink if you go to a coffee shop or a cafe?
I will take lemon tea and ginger.
Okay, lemon, ginger. Do you ever add a bit of honey to that sometimes?
Yeah, honey or sugar. I don't mind sugar, but it should be lemon or ginger. Yeah, Earl Grey in England. In South Africa I'll do the rooibos. So a little bit diverse.
You like Earl Grey because that's kind of the divisive drink. Some people love it, some people hate it.
No, I do love it. I do love Earl Grey.
Have you ever had a London fog?
No.
So a London fog, ironically, I first discovered in New York rather than in London, but it is Earl Grey tea, like a very small amount of Earl Grey tea, quite an intense shot of it, with some steamed milk and vanilla essence, vanilla syrup, and it's a very yummy, wintry, warm hug of a drink. London fog is supposed to give you that sort of snuggly feeling, sensation. I don't know if you need that when it's 36-degree heat in Kampala, but maybe next time you visit the UK.
I visit the UK, I would love to test it.
We'll make you a London vlog in our coffee shop. I would love, over the next 30 or so minutes, to try and do the impossible, right? It's to try and take your wonderful life and condense it into a short interview. I'm so inspired by you, Racheal, and everything I've heard and listened to and read about you already. Charlotte is a trustee for our charity, and she's our connection, and she said Racheal is the best person I know. So that's the introduction to me that you've already have. So you're off to a fantastic start. I just want to try and contain that and put it out there for people to experience. Let's start at the start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your upbringing in Uganda, what that looked like, and then we'll go on a journey as to where you are today.
Yeah, so my life starts in Ginger. I was born in Ginger, but my parents got separated 5 months after I was born. I always wanted to think because I was an ugly baby. Well, that's what I thought for a very long time. Like my father looked at me like, she can't be.
So hang about. Let me stop you straight away. So first of all, you were born in a place called Ginger, which has a lot of resonance with me as someone with red hair. And then you said something about being called an ugly baby. That's terrible.
Yeah, it is. I was strikingly very, very small and very dark, with for many people in the old days, I think now things have changed. There is a glorification of Black beauty. But when I was growing up, lighter skinned kids were praised and loved. But my sister was really light skinned like my dad. I was like my mom. And so I don't think we were received. There could have been other reasons, like my mom's family was poorer, and my father and mom are born in the same village. So I think there was that kind of segregation on social classes, because one was in a bigger social class and another was like poorer. So I think maybe that could have been the reason why we separated. But earlier on, my mom had a cousin who worked in Kalere as a teacher at the church school, which was beginning at that time. It had only worked for 2 years. And so she invited her into Kalere to become a nursery teacher. My mom had already done teaching, training in nursery teaching. So she moved into Kalere and started as a teacher at the school, which at the time, it was a second school in this community. And it was started by the church because the priest at that time realized that a lot of kids were not going to school. The levels of poverty were very high. Poor drainage issues, many children were dying to cholera and dysentery and so many things. So the church wanted to be a voice at that time. And my mom came to work with this school, which was at the church. And we basically stayed at the church store. You know, it was this little mud house, which you never see in Kampala. And it had holes. You could literally look through the house.
Wow. So let me stop you there. So you've moved from Ginger to Kalere. Now, for people that are unfamiliar with Uganda, such as I, whereabouts is Kalere? Is that a big move?
So Kalere is in Kampala, the capital city. So Ginger is about 80 kilometers to the east, and Kampala is, Kampala is in central Uganda. And within Kampala, I think 20 minutes away from the city center, that's where you get Kalere. So it's a small suburb, but Kalere has a very big market, a farmer's market. So most of the farmers across the country bring their produce first in Kalere, and then from there they distribute their produce. So it's central because of that. And I think the community grew out of and around the marketplace. So there's so many people compared to other small suburbs, but partly because of that, the presence of that market. Yeah.
And you talked about living in a mud hut, but I just want to make everyone aware that I think you're around my age, perhaps younger than me. Is that right, Racheal?
I am 35.
35. So yeah, so you're younger than me. So I'm 39. So and this would have been, how old were you at the time?
When we moved to Kalere, that was 91. I was just 5 months old.
1991. Okay, so we're not talking a long time ago, are we?
No.
Yeah. Carry on. Tell us more.
Yeah, so we lived in this little mud house. Now, the problem is Kalere is a swamp, or was a swamp before people encroached on it. And so it meant that it was meant to collect water, and now people came and moved here. But these were poor people who have make less than $1 a day, who were moving into this. And so they destroyed the swamp. And so whenever it rained, now imagine a place that floods, but without toilets or latrines. And so when it rains, all the sewer just comes and meets into the house. And we would now we have 2 seasons of rain, and each season is 3 months. So you would have like 3 months where basically every day your house is filled with filth because of this water that drains out of Kampala and collects in this community. And so kids would get typhoid, cholera. And I remember that so many of my friends died young, partly because of these sanitary related diseases. And also it was because it's a slum, you have people of all sorts of behavior. So we had a big population in the 90s that were basically old women. You know, Uganda had a big scourge of HIV/AIDS. So many young people had died, and there was like a lot of old people were taking care of their orphaned children. So my community particularly had very old women. But then also there were these young people who got themselves in all sorts of things because they were not going to school. They got themselves into drugs. And so drug abuse and violence was part of our reality. And people killed for small reasons. It was common to have, I think in South Africa they call ringing, where they put a ring, like a car ring on somebody and burn them. That's very common in my community.
Car tire on somebody and they fill it full of petrol and set it on fire. Yeah, grossly violent, awful act. Yeah.
It was. So somebody would steal like food and they would just burn them, you know, or someone steals a pair of shoes. And so I think my childhood memories is filled with thieves being burnt, women experiencing rape and sometimes gang rape. But then they were normal, like it wasn't like, oh, this and this happened. It was more like, oh, yesterday this happened, but the next morning we somehow coexist. And we played games as children. So there was a sense in which this was normal. You could play, you could have fun, but there was the reality of poverty that has changed over the past 30 years.
So where was the policing in that community when you were growing up? Because it sounds quite absent. If people are taking law and justice into their hands and committing these awful violent acts in response to crime.
It was there. There is actually a police officer who is led, and he died in action. He was called Brown. I'm sure he had another name, but because he was light skinned, so we just called him Brown.
PC Brown.
Yeah. And he was taken down by thieves. But I know that everyone knew Brown, that almost every night he was just pursuing some thieves. And most of the thieves, it was said that they use a lot of witchcraft. And so I don't know whether it worked and it made them invisible, but I think maybe they didn't have enough structure at that time to take care of the crime, the magnitude of crime that was there. And so, yeah, I think they were there. I remember having that, but I think they were non-equipped enough at that time. And again, knowing where Ugandan history, we're just coming from the 80s where there had been a lot of lawlessness into the 90s. So I think maybe that also played into, but I cannot say for sure. And maybe I was too young also to pay attention to some of those.
Yeah, in preparation for our podcast this morning, I did a little bit of reading up on Ugandan recent history, and I was amazed to see that it wasn't until 1962 that Uganda was completely independent of Great Britain. I thought, wow, how recent is that? That's extraordinary. I didn't realize. That's my ignorance there. But so what's happened then is you've grown up in this community, but I know you as somebody that's in the fight against injustice, and you're going to talk to us about that. Where did the seed of that first begin?
I think it still began in Kalere. So I think that the uniqueness of Kalere is that we always had people that came in to support. And I talk a lot about World Vision, establishing the first school and supporting the local church and the community with water and all that. So I think, and my mom was like one of the connecting people because she stayed at the church, like I said in the store, we always had that relationship with whoever came in to work. And they brought me a lot of gifts, particularly dolls, So I felt like I was always inspired by the people who did something in the community. But then also I was struck by the bad things that were happening. And I remember in 2001, I was just almost finishing primary school. And there was a girl who had been gang raped. Now, the boys had done a bet, like 10 boys. So like, this is the most beautiful girl, or we think this is the most beautiful girl. Whoever can get it, we collect money. And then when she says yes, you lower her into a room and everyone will come and use her. And it is said that the last boy had placed a condom in her, like just pushed it, I think to humiliate her. And the story got out. It got out so big that almost everyone knew in the village. And she came to my mom, I think, to talk through things. She was as young, we were in the same class, but she was slightly maybe older, maybe 2 years older. So she could have been like 13, maybe 13. I was 11 at the time. And so she came with support. And I don't know how my mom helped, because after some time she disappeared from the community. But I remember even from an early age, people saying, oh, she's a prostitute. She shouldn't have gone. And I knew, because the boys were involved in this. Some of them, I knew them as contemporaries or as friends vaguely. So I was like, no, she's not to blame. Someone is to blame. So I think for me, those issues, and I know my mom as a teacher would position herself in listening to these stories and trying to help the young girls that came up to her from the school particularly. So I think that's where the seed, and I think that's the only story I vividly remember as a child. I interacted with this story. I saw this girl. But again, she was the classic, beautiful African girl, very light skin, large hips. And so it was easier, even at that age, to think maybe she deserved it because she was floating her body and all that. But I think from that on, I wanted to be different, but also wanted to confront those that were doing that, or speak openly about the things that were happening. And I think whether it was in school or staff, I always brought up those conversations and said that we should do something about it. Yeah, so I think that is like my first memory. Yeah. But I think the real turning point was when I came to the UK. And both my visits, I was involved in Christian communities. So one with Youth for Christ, and then the other time with Wycliffe Hall and the Oka in Oxford. and it was sad. And I remember telling my stories again. Dark humor would be laughing through the most hectic story, and I could see horror on people's faces.
So what? So we've jumped a little bit. So we've gone from growing up in Caleri and your first experience at 11 years old of what was clearly an act of gross injustice, and that perhaps being that first seed that you can look back and remember. We're now at Wycliffe Hall, which is, for those who are unfamiliar, is Oxford University's theological wing. It's their department of theology within Oxford University. So how did a little girl from a community you've described as a slum in Uganda outside Kampala and Caleri end up at the University of Oxford studying theology?
I mean, like, I think God just ordered the step. In Calera, we had World Vision, take care of our education. And then when they phased out in 2001, actually, then I had my uncle get involved. He taught in a very good school. So somehow he helped pay some of my tuition. And because he was a brilliant teacher, and he made everyone believe I was his daughter, and he helped that way. Then from there, I find myself in high school. And what I didn't say, when I was 9, I had become a Christian, and I had become a Christian because I was given food, rice and beef, a bowl of rice, I always say. And I was like, if Jesus can give you rice, I'm in, So I think, and what had changed was that there was a rebirth of hope within me, but also a sense of purpose. And at that time, it was more like just preach the gospel. And anyone who knows me from the age of 9, they would know that I spent my childhood into my teenage years at school being the preacher of the school, right? And that shaped my voice. And so, yes, I went through high school. And again, like I said, there was the favor of God on me, I think, because I always got scholarships. And then I finished high school, and I did not make it to university like I'd hoped to. I was doing the sciences. I was doing physics and math, and economics, probably the biggest sin I've ever committed.
What, studying economics?
and mathematics and physics. I think economics was okay, but physics and math, no. I had tried in my O-levels, but just A-level traumatized me. And so I couldn't get into university when on merit. I could still get in. I had enough points to get in, but on private scholarship. And, you did that because the government started offering free education with my year. So the government was saying, if girls do sciences, we'll give them scholarships. That's why I did the sciences or physics and math. That was the real motivation. But then when I didn't get the cutoff points that the government required, then I thought, my life has ended. And so I decided to get jobs, and I taught in 4 different schools. And I quit every end of the month. It was either exploitation, making me overwork, or either you're working a lot and you're not being paid. There was always a reason. The last one was someone was coughing and we're sharing cups, and I thought, I don't know whatever that person is suffering from. I'm not going to die here. So I left. And then I ended up working as a school matron in a school. Now, I had applied to Makerere University. I had been given a course, but remember, I was coming in as a private sponsored student. My sister had just joined paramedical school, my older sister, and mom was putting all her efforts in supporting her education. It was very expensive. And I knew she couldn't support me. So I thought, let me get some work. So I got the placement in Makerere, took a year off to work. And so now I find myself working in a primary school as a matron, which I think is one of the most degrading things you can do, because all you do is clean the kids, make sure they're fed. You don't do a lot of the teaching. That was brilliant for the children, so I would teach sometimes. But I was working for a salary of 80,000, right? 80,000 Ugandan shillings. That's about 18 pounds or 16 pounds.
Is that,
British
what's that, a
pounds.
week or a month, or what's that?
A month.
A month, yeah.
And I was, I was being faithful. And I remember, so at the end of the month, and I'd extended my services. Like I said, I was a preacher, so I would tell the kids the biblical stories. I would take them to church. I would teach them songs, so they loved me. And I would help them with homework. If you've done mathematics at A-level, surely you can do mathematics at primary with so much ease. And so at the end of the month, the head teacher invites me in, and he says, "You've done very well, and we want to promote you." And he says, "I know you at the university and you want money. That's why you're here." So he says, I will give you 70,000, extra 70,000. And I was excited. I'm like, if I use 50,000 in a month, I can use 100, and that means I have 1 million at the end of the year. That pays for a semester, So it was like a great deal. And then he said to me, he walks up to the door, locks it, and he said, "But every woman that has worked here has slept with me." And so he goes, "We can either do it now, or you can select a day and a place where we can meet." And I don't know, but I was the most Christian person I've ever been at that age. I was 18. I could tell scriptures off my head. I was passionate about sharing my faith. And I've seen firsthand what, for example, fornication had done to my friends in the slum where I was growing up. I knew friends who had given birth at 13 and how their lives was crippled by 18. So I said, no, I cannot do that. And of course I was throwing around all the Christian things, why I cannot do it. And then he became violent, and he started forcing his way, and we fought. I was very small. I mean, like about 35 kgs maybe, very, very slim. And we start fighting. And I think God has a sense of humor. There was a girl who needed help, and I think she had seen us walk in. So she realizes the door is not opening, and I think maybe she had sensed some noise from the background, and she starts knocking. She's like, teacher. She was calling his name. You're like, open the door. And so this guy went into a panic and flung open the door. And he said, no, he didn't even say anything. I just walked out the door and I said, today you were taking advantage of me because I was poor and vulnerable. But I said, the next time you see me, I'll be so much better. And so I ran to the door and I leave that place and I go and pack everything. Now, he did not even pay the 80,000. And I was broken to go back home. So I phoned my auntie, who I think was a successful businesswoman. She was a wife to my uncle. She had never had education, but she was successful at her craft. And I went, and my auntie taught me how to do crafts. She taught me how to make samosas. And I want to tell you, the following year, I was back at Macquarie University, and I was selling samosas to raise my tuition. And I would take a loan, which my mom would help me secure because she had a profession as a teacher, would secure a loan. And I would wake up every day at 3 a.m. to make samosas, and they would be ready by 7, take them to the market, and then get ready to go to university. And that's how I made it through. And then, God would have it again through different connections, especially missionaries that visit Uganda. That's how I got my opportunity to come to Norfolk to serve with British Youth for Christ, because the family had visited and I thought I was amazing. Now, this is a thing. People think I'm amazing until they spend time with me. Like, oh, you're amazing. Come to our church, come to our community. And that's how I found myself in Norfolk. And later on, again, I got the chance to study at Wycliffe Hall. So I think God just created that space for me to get provision. There was provision along the way. Yes, there were hardships, but I think there was provision for me to go through my career, graduate, be able to come to England and do that time with Youth for Christ, and later on come in and study Christian apologetics. Yeah.
Amazing. And listen, I don't want to rob God of any glory in this, because it's a grey day out there, and I'm fear if I walk outside of my garden office I might get struck down by lightning. But and he has the glory, absolutely. I'm agreeing with you, but you worked heck of hard life there to make that happen, to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and make samosas for 3 or 4 hours, sell them in order to pay your way to, that's incredible hard work too.
The thing is, we would make the cowpeas the night before, and the times when the fire, because you're using firewood or charcoal, the nights when it just doesn't, and then again we fear to take the stove in the house because you can suffocate to death, because we lived in this one little room, me and my siblings and mom. So it was hard work. It was hard work, and it was really hard. So sometimes you go to bed at midnight, but you have to wake up at 3. So I am no longer a morning person. Let me say that again. I am not a morning person.
Racheal, if only you'd discovered this magical drink called coffee, it would have been so much easier for you. So you went to Wycliffe Hall, but you decided not to stay in the UK, not to stay in Norfolk, where I live, this particularly quaint and safe corner of the UK. You returned to Uganda and have engaged in quite an extraordinary mission. So why don't you tell us about what you're doing now?
I came back in 2015, and again, you interact. I love interacting with young people, both in schools, in the local community, and the church space. And I think the more, particularly in schools, I think I've visited more than 100 schools locally. The more you interact, the more you meet students that have gone through really, really hectic stuff. And the first time when I returned, actually, I got a chance to be in the most affluent schools in the country. And every time I would speak to young people, then they would come up with lots of things, cases of incest. They talk about rape and stuff. And it made me think, like, what about Kalere? I'm in these places that seem posh. What about here? And so when I came back with not the interest to speak in bigger platforms, but to kind of like see the person next to me. What are they dealing with? And I remember the first meeting we had when I just returned, maybe 30, 40 teenagers attend our meeting. And there was this one particular Muslim girl who had come in, I think out of curiosity because her friends had come. And we were talking about identity because, again, like I said, I was an ugly baby. Everyone thought I was, especially in my country. And so I always want to talk about identity, for the little girls to look at me and say, it doesn't matter if you're not physically attractive like in the book, but you can make your life bigger than this. And so we were talking, and this little girl puts up her hand, 11-year-old, and he says, what scriptures do you read to be encouraged? I thought, that's a very strange question for an 11-year-old. And then she shoots another one. She was very restless, so it was like, boom, 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 and so she goes, what do you do if you hate your father? And then she goes, how do you kill him? And so I'm like, okay, that's a very big, and you could tell also the girls were like very astonished listening to these questions. And so we discover later on at the end of the meeting that her father, who worked up country, had remarried. But when he came back on Saturdays, after they watched news, in Uganda they call it Agatali Konfo, it's uncensored news. So anything traumatic you want to see in the country, you tune on there and see it, right? And it's very popular here. People love it. So she says every time that news ends at about 11, my father comes in the bedroom. Now, many of the houses here is just one room separated by a curtain. So the bedroom is just the other side of the curtain. He comes in the bedroom and he forces me to sleep with him. And he says, but I have tried putting on extra pants. Sometimes I put on 5 pants so that he won't do it. And the mother is in the sitting room, another side of the curtain, and she's crying out for help. And she pretends she doesn't know what's going on there. And she says, but he doesn't stop. And so I want help. And I remember the next time I was in another meeting, because I do public speaking, particularly in churches. So I was speaking at another youth meeting in a very affluent church. And this pastor came to me and was like, I love your experiences. How can I help? God has called me to serve your community. I said, thank God, yesterday I met this girl, and I tell the story like I did. And then she looked at me and said, Racheal, 3-year-olds in the slum are raped. What are you talking about? And as if to say, oh, she's old enough, she can endure this, she can find help. And I think for me, that really stirred up the passion in me to say, no, that's not okay. She's a child, she's a daughter, and she deserves help, and we can help her. And so I looked around for help. And the first place we took her, again, they were taking advantage of her. They turned her into a mini slave. And we decided that we would take her into boarding school. Now, the good news is that a year later, we established where her mom was, and she was reunited with the mother. And this is almost 10 years ago. But I think the moment I opened my eyes to see and hear these stories, then so many stories have come up. And I could sit here and I tell you so many of 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, story upon story that has happened. But I think also the good news is that we've been able to throw ourselves there. One, to listen. Secondly, to do something, offer medical support, education opportunities. And we have seen, again, so many lives transformed through our work. And so, I decided to start a charity called Ufahari. So at first we started as a girls' meeting at church, but then we decided, why don't we register and be an official organization? And I think, again, we started doing the basics. We would provide sanitary towels, because, again, that's one of the loopholes that men will use to take advantage of girls. So we're like, let's deal with menstrual poverty And then let's talk about this. So we've run programs like, for example, 1 in 4, where we basically 1 in 4 girls in Uganda will be pregnant by the time they turn 19. And so like, how do we reduce that number? And many times half of that number is because they have been violated, they've been abused, they're not taking themselves willfully. And so we said, how do we put that? And so we started to do these sensitization programs in schools. And again, you can find children one after another sharing these experiences. And so we've done those baby steps. But when COVID hit, the problem of sex violence became even more pronounced. And so then we started saying, can we take on even children, take them away from home and offer safety? Those who are pregnant, can we find pregnancy crisis centers that can support them? And so it feels like a junk of all trade, the master of man, but I think it's trying to do everything possible to see that we can transfer dignity and offer a learning air to a child, and also tell them that irrespective of whatever has happened, I think you have a great future. And again, like I said, I can tell you story after story of how we've seen those lives transform.
Thank you, Racheal. And some of those stories will be really difficult for people to hear. When you've been exposed to so many of them, it's easy for you to list them, but some people will struggle. We were listening to a podcast in which you were interviewed on yesterday, my wife and I, and we've just had a baby girl that's currently 3 months old. She's just approaching that. She's like 12 weeks something, And Lydia, my wife, was crying and listening to your stories, and I'm really finding this hard to listen to. And now she's become a mum and she has a little baby girl, and there'll be a lot of people probably thinking the same. I wonder, there's one more specific question I want to ask quickly before I forget. You mentioned, and forgive listeners if this feels a bit graphic, but you mentioned about the sanitary towels being a way of combating sexual violence in some way. Can you just explain how that works?
So many girls don't have sanitary towels, and so that there is a lot of stigma around it. So naturally, lately people are talking about it, but in the past days, they used not to talk about menstrual health and all that. And so many girls just didn't know how to cope with it. And so they find themselves either missing school when their periods come, but also most parents, there's some communities where if a girl starts menstruating, then they think she's ready for marriage. And
Wow.
so once that happens, then they start preparing them for marriage. And normally it's forced, but some of these have not even finished primary school. And then there are cases where some girls are desperate because they cannot afford a sanitary towel. They will take an offer from a man who is willing to offer a sanitary towel and sleep with them. And we've come across stories like that.
Wow.
And you realize it's very cheap. The pad is very cheap. But also what we are doing mostly as a ministry is actually teaching them how to make their own. And we offer them material, but also can you use a cotton t-shirt, for example, in small polythene bags? So we've dedicated a lot of our time there to do that. But then also these trainings happen in groups, and it gives us an opportunity to engage with them further, to hear their stories and that. So it's a big problem, menstrual poverty, and many people take advantage of that, especially men. So whether they're using it to send their girls into a marriage, or they're using it to say, I can provide that if you can do this for me. Yeah.
And that absence of being in school makes them a bit more vulnerable during that period. Okay, that's really helpful, and I didn't know that, so some learning for me. As we record this, we're slap bang in the middle of 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. It's a UN campaign. There was a big news story. There's the G20 summit that's taking place in Johannesburg in South Africa at the moment, and the headline was stolen by this fantastic brave group of women that conducted this protest at the ceremony and laid down in silence, hundreds of them wearing black, to try and raise awareness just to the amount of gender-based violence in South Africa. And of course, it's not unique to South Africa. Consequently, they have declared it a national disaster, which is going to allow them to release more funds and hopefully treat the issue with more of the resources, more of the political will that's required to really defeat it. And I'm sure there's similar case in Uganda. Why does this exist so much, and what would you suggest is the best route forward to tackling it, not just in a small scale, case by case scale, but on a larger societal, sociological scale, to prevent women and girls being abused in the numbers that they are?
So I think there is a growing apathy around women rights. Particularly, I've seen that in Uganda when we started. The current government put women emancipation at the forefront, and we have one of the most balanced, if not the most balanced, parliament. For example, in Africa, we have
Oh, wow.
equal representation of men and women in parliament, and there have been lots of policies that have been written in our country. But I think the problem is to assume that because a few women have been emancipated, they represent the biggest majority. It's not, what is the English word? A homogeneous like group. It's not like women are not one group.
Yeah.
The different classes, they're different, what can I say? They're at different levels, right? And so you have women, for example, the Speaker of Parliament. You cannot compare her experience and story with the woman in, for example, refugee settlement. They have different lived experiences. And I think for us, what we've seen, especially as a country, the biggest deception has been because we have equal representation in Parliament. Therefore, all women have been emancipated. And so there is almost a big hatred towards those who are fronting women's rights because I said, oh, for 40 years, ever since this government came, all you have done is talk about women and women, and people don't want to listen. And that creates a sense of apathy. And I think maybe it's global that people have had these stories. But the thing is, I always say in my community, there is a police station and we've always had crime. But because it's been there for a long time and crime still persists, they should close the station. We have to keep the station open because people are people and they will fail and participate in crime. And so I think that we need to move away. And sorry, I think for me, I think we need to go back to the basis of one after the other so that when we listen to the story, we don't say, oh, that's a child in the slum, or that's, a woman on this street in Kampala, or this is an isolated case into. I think people need to be called back to the basis of like, this is a human being, whether a girl or a boy. And if they have suffered this kind of violence, then they need to be supported, they need to be protected, they need to be listened to. And I think we need to call ourselves out of this individualistic lifestyle and see ourselves as part of this big community where if anyone is hurting, we're also hurting and we need to support one another. And so we can have the policies, but if we're not thinking that the person suffering could be my sister, then I think we're wasting time. So yes, the policies have to be written, but we need to take care of one another and listen more with empathy. And I think also online is helping, but sometimes it doesn't help because there is a way it portrays people like as if they're not human. And so we scroll, and I really struggle when someone will post maybe someone that has been brutally raped, and then the next slide they're posting about their birthday and they're dancing, and I'm like, come on, we must hold some value for life. If we're saying that let's stop and grieve, maybe there should be. And I think that the image you talk about from South Africa is a big reminder that maybe the world needs to stop and say, whatever is happening is not wrong. I mean, I've taken time to write some of these stories in my poetic collection. And one of the arguments I say is because sometimes maybe the effects are not physical, but also we know that there have been deaths caused by this. And we need to say that the emotional scars and spiritual scars that people are carrying. And maybe we need to ask ourselves, should I be the person, extending the depth of this scar, or should I be the person that is helping somebody heal? And maybe if we can, then we can make a difference, one person at a time. Yeah. Sorry, maybe I answered that wrongly, but that's what I think.
No, it's really helpful. I haven't answered it wrongly at all. I just wonder, with you being so outspoken about the protection of girls and young women in your country and in your community, has that ever put you in a position where you felt persecuted or at risk at all?
All the time. All the time. I think like what I said, when I am on radio, TV, the first critique is that we've tired of hearing the stories of women and girls, and so people dismiss it very easily. And there is a sense in which we have abandoned the boy child, and I think a lot needs to be done to empower the boy child. And what I always say is that, the men also need to stand up and speak for the boys, because men have a better understanding of what boys experience. So men should also rise up. As we have women that are speaking, we should have. So there is that basic, what can I call, aggression that is always directed because they feel like, oh, you've chosen one path. They're all children. I said, no, you're a man. Go and support the boys. But also the physical. I mean, we've had cases where we've had somebody arrested and they will mobilize their gang to come and attack you. I'm very, very, when I'm around the community, I'm very careful what I eat or not, because I've had threats for poisoning. I've had people attack me. And actually one incident when I was attacked, someone came and he recognized me because my mom had taught him, like this in this group of thugs. And then they're like, oh, this is teacher Jessica's daughter, let her go. Well, I had brought out their knives. And so there has been that. Yeah, I've had harassment on public transport. So, it's there. But I think, again, I look at what I have to endure vis-a-vis what some of the young girls I talk to have endured. And I think it's just a little price in comparison to what they're experiencing.
My understanding, Racheal, is that you're not somebody that lives in a penthouse apartment in the poshest parts of Kampala and drives into the slum regions and the poor regions in order to engage before finishing your workday and returning to a gated community. Not that I judge people for doing that by any means whatsoever. I would probably do something very similar if I was there. But my understanding is that you live in these communities, you're fully engaged with these communities. I even understand you fostered a number of girls. Is that right? Why don't you paint a picture of what family life looks like for you on a day-to-day?
Like I said, COVID created a very big and unique situation for us because for the first time, I came across girls whose family members were asking them to sleep with men to get food. How bizarre can that get? And so we decided that instead of keeping them there, we should open our house to have these children come in. And actually, in the first year we had them, because it was COVID, we just had children come in and stay with us. And we had 11 at first who just came in. And these are siblings. So we have one group that is like 4 children from the same household. The same situation was happening to all of them. And so we thought, don't take away one, just bring the whole group. Then we came across 2 sisters who were working in a bar. At the time, one was 7 and the other was 9. Again, they were already sexually active because sometimes it demanded that they have to be intimate with the clients. We have another girl who was also working in a bar. She was 7 and she had experienced things that I think no one should ever. And she pretended to be actually deaf because she thought she was just afraid of the world when we first met with her. And then I learned that she was orphaned and yet had been forced to work in a bar, tried to run away and work as a housemaid, but she was still being abused. And so those children, yes, you come and stay with us. And I'm thankful because my mom stays in the same house. So between her and myself, we're able to manage. I think she does more of the caring than I do, but I'm the good mommy who has all the gifts and she does all the bad work of parenting. But yeah, we have brought them together. And actually, it's interesting that you asked because next week we'll be moving them into a house that is out of Kalere, because also what we have experienced is that some parents or some relatives who have been taking advantage of these kids come back and either to try to fight them or to fight us for taking away these children who they used to exploit and get money. And so we have constructed a house where they'll be moving in and hopefully have, but what we have done previously during school, they're in boarding school. And then during the holidays, that's when they come back. And so it's not as busy as it sounds because we've tried to adopt the school system. For right now, it's a full house. And tomorrow, the last group comes back home. So
amazing. We're so close to Christmas. I was just wondering what Christmas is going to look like for you in your house.
Crazy. I won't be there, I think. But there'll be a lot of food. Lots of conversation, lots of conflict, because you have girls from about 3 years to 16, 17. So it's chaotic. We're always having something to deal with. So she took my skirt to, the arrays of things. And then also these are children that have been neglected for most of their life. So they demand for attention. I think that's the biggest thing emotionally. And then some of them, the effects of the abuse is still as pronounced as they were first abused. So the traumatic experience have left them wounded, and so you need psychological support. And so sometimes we don't know how to deal with it, and we have to just bring in like extra support from outside to know how to cope with those. But it's fun. We, for example, sing on Saturdays, and because it's coming to Christmas, we do Christmas carols every Sunday, and so there are those. And one of them actually is Noel, and she loves us with Noel. She's like, oh, I'm enjoying this. So we we manage like in a big African family, and it's great. It's great, and everyone will have a new dress.
Everyone gets a new dress for Christmas. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, everyone has a new dress. Yeah, really, really flamboyant new dress. So we're looking forward to that as well. But I will be doing a walk to support another community, so that's why I may not be at home for Christmas. But everyone will be. I'm going to Karamoja. Karamoja is one of the most, I don't know how to call it, the poorest community in Uganda, the poorest region. And I want to support a group there to run a literacy program for kids that don't go to school. And so I've decided I'm walking from Kampala to Karamoja, and I think I may get there on Christmas. So, I
Oh
won't be
my
at home.
goodness, how far is that walk?
500 kilometers.
500 kilometers. Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. Do you have like a GoFundMe page, or is there somewhere we can?
Not yet. But yeah.
Okay, well, make sure you create one.
Yeah, that's the dream. So everything that I've said about Kaleri, I think it's much worse in that community. And they have so many cases of children that trafficked within the city. I've worked with some of those here. And when I visited, I thought someone needs to do something. So that's what that's why I'm on Be Home at Christmas. But,
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, Racheal, it's been fantastic talking to you. A lot of what we've discussed is some pretty grave, difficult, horrendous situations. I'm so encouraged that people like yourself are out there fighting the good fight and engaged in pushing back the darkness. And I want as many people as possible that hear this to find a way of supporting you. We've been talking before the podcast about how we can help with the visibility of your organization and getting you guys support with resources so you can keep doing this incredible work. So we're going to do some work in the background, hopefully, to make that a little bit easier. I always like to end on a hopeful note because I think it's important that we do, because we need it, don't we? So do you have anything that will inspire us, anything that gives you hope for the future?
I think people like you, I think I love to hear, especially men, fronting the cause of the most vulnerable. I think that as we continue doing, but the thing is, once we do even the small acts, it makes a difference. My greatest joy has been when we meet these children, and then maybe I'll end on one last story. We had a girl that joined us in 2020 after COVID. Her grandmother was asking her to sleep with her uncle so that they get groceries. But she was supporting us in the menstrual hygiene project because we had promised that the most active one will give them a scholarship. But she's a good girl, so she supported. And she had a tumor in her breast as well, which had been ignored. And she was in excruciating pain. So she would come to help with this pain. So we did a small fundraiser, got her treatment, and then were able to support her to finish high school. And recently she graduated with a diploma in fashion and design. But I went to the graduation, and I didn't have a car, so I used a board. And it was the most dusty road I've ever been on. But I was determined I'll be there. I asked her to, get her friends to get her transport. And I said, the money we're supposed to give you will buy you a smartphone. So we're not going to buy cake. We're not going to pay for transport. We're not doing a party. But I want you will get a phone that you can use to inspire yourself to do more designs. Anyways, I get to the school and they're reading her and I make my way through. Now, I was late and I was on a bike. So I got there and it's like someone had poured dust on my face. Like I was literally covered in that. And I make it. And I said, graduating. And then she goes, Mommy. And then she walks in and gives me the biggest hug. And then she's crying. I said, oh, here is your phone. And she's crying. She's so happy. And then she goes, oh, Mommy, did you come like this? I said, how am I like, you covered in that? And I looked at myself and looked at everybody. I was like, did you just walk in like that? But I think for me, that joy of knowing that she is safe, she has a vocation, her life has been restored, and she was as smart as everybody else. And we can give her the confidence that life is different and can be different. And so I look at those stories and I hang those pictures in my house and I say, whatever we're doing, it could be hard, but it's making a difference. And so the privilege of being able, so my hope is that whatever small seeds we are planting, God will always honor them and we'll always see these beautiful stories. And that's just one. And I think that's what keeps us going, that the more we do, the more we see lives transformed. And it's the biggest thank you that you can ever get. And so my encouragement is that whoever is doing, keep doing. And those small things, whether it's transport to get a child who has been trafficked back home, it makes a difference, because then when the family receives it, like they're receiving the Queen of England or the King of England, because they feel like, oh, you have restored hope. And I think that's the invitation I call. So there is hope, because even in a world of apathy, there are still those who are committed to the cause. And as we make teams and work together slowly, I think that God is transforming, and we can see that transformation as well.
Amazing. What a perfect place to end. Racheal, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
You're welcome.
You have been as awesome as I was hoping you would be. So that's
Thank
great.
you.
Wow. What a wonderful human being Racheal is. I don't know what you've got planned this Christmas, but I bet it doesn't involve a 500-kilometre walk to fund the literacy programme for kids in poverty. I know much of what Racheal shared today may have been hard to listen to, but hopefully there was some learning there too. She paints quite a grim picture of the magnitude of gender-based violence in Uganda, and introduced an interesting paradigm where, because the country now has equal gender representation in Parliament, many think the issue of gender inequality and violence no longer exists, and wish people like Racheal would stop talking about it. How wrong they are. A 2025 study found that 51% of women and girls aged 15 to 49 years in Uganda have experienced physical violence, and 22% have experienced sexual violence. And since COVID, there's been a 29% increase in domestic violence. Links to those studies are all in the show notes. These findings are consistent with the global data shared in this campaign by the United Nations, which reveals that 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced some form of gender violence in their lifetime. Racheal mentioned the need for some girls to hide their period to avoid being married off early, which would also be consistent with the global data that estimates approximately 12 million children worldwide are living in forced marriages, according to the International Labour Organization. And her belief is that education is absolutely key to the protection of children, especially girls. I liked what Racheal said in closing. We have to have hope, because even in a world of apathy, there are still people committed to the cause. And I say let's be those people. After we finished the podcast, I asked Racheal, is there anything we could give towards? And she told me the following, okay? £5 will buy you a pack of washable sanitary pads. £20 will buy a dozen school books. £200 will put a child through school for a year. And £500, my favourite, will buy a cow. And actually, that's a great investment of money. The cow not only provides milk, but you can also sell the milk. And if you keep that cow healthy, in 2 or 3 years, you can then sell it for 2 or 3 times what you bought it for. So if you've got a spare 500 quid, why not buy Racheal and her team a cow? So there's something there for everyone's budget, isn't there? And of course, if you want to give to the literacy program that Racheal is raising money for through her epic walk to Karamoja, we can do that too. So I've set up a giving page, and the link is in the show notes of this podcast. So hey, let's be generous this Christmas and help Racheal to rescue, restore and rejuvenate more children, as is the mission of Ufahari Girls. And find out more about them at ufaharigirls.com. I'm going to end this one there. As you know already, this podcast is produced by Blue Bear Coffee. We use coffee to protect children from exploitation, and you can find out more about us at bluebearcoffee.com. And maybe grab yourself a bag of our delicious new Christmas coffee there too. Have a wonderful Christmas season. Thank you for listening. God bless. Peace.